have finally completed all 11 of Adrian Tchaikovsky's novellas. Only because I couldn't get to all of the novels, but that's okay. And I wanted to talk to you about all 11 of those novellas today to help you decide which ones you want to... Wait, are you serious?
Early in the first half of next year, there'll be another novella out from Solaris, which is The Hungry Gods.
Okay, so I guess as we're filming this video, Adrian announced that he has another book coming out in 2025.
The Hungry Gods is basically what happens when everything has been completely collapsed on Earth and everyone is living a thoroughly miserable existence, but then a bunch of billionaires from space come back to make it even worse.
As we're filming this video, it's already old, so go figure. Thanks, Adrian. I would love it if you would slow your roll just a little bit so I could catch up. Just a little. So I'm gonna be honest, I can't rank all of these novellas. What I can tell you is some of my general personal preferences, but mostly you have to decide which ones are going to be right for you. What I can promise is that almost all of these novellas are different than you think. Why do I like Adrian Tchaikovsky so much? To answer this question, I have to be honest. Adrian is not your typical sci-fi fantasy author. He is one of the most playful, and because of that, exciting authors I've ever read. And by playful, I don't mean lighthearted or funny. I mean that he likes to play with the craft of story making. He has a lot of fun playing with blending genres, blending different kinds of narratives, different themes, different tropes, everything he just plays around with. Any book that you pick up by Adrian Tchaikovsky might be a really big hit for you.
I love this book.
But just as easily, another book might be just as big of a disaster as the other one was a win. As such, you could pick up any Adrian Tchaikovsky book and you don't know what's coming at ya. And that makes him a very exciting author for me. I don't see a lot of authors these days who are allowed to play with writing the way that Adrian Tchaikovsky gets away with. And because of that, I am a diehard Adrian fan, even though that means that not all of his books are wins for me. And that's why I try to go out of my way to read an Adrian Tchaikovsky novella.
Novellas are a very, very good field to experiment with because it's a small narrative, you've got more control over it, you can see it all in one go, essentially, so you can be a little more inventive with the way you put it together. With the novellas especially, I can experiment more with the concepts I'm working with because one thing I found about a novella is it is an absolutely perfect length to really delve into one idea, which is certainly with the Solaris novellas what I'm doing there. Each one is one particular sci-fi concept that gets very thoroughly bottomed out with no side plots or distractions or diversions. It's just that one thing, given room to breathe and then put away, I guess.
Now I have divvied these up the same way that his publisher has. So we have 4 different categories and I'm gonna add a bonus 5th to this. And that's gonna be Terrible Worlds Revolutions, Terrible Worlds Destinations, Terrible Worlds Transformations. Then we have our standalone duology section, and the 5th and bonus section is those novellas that I haven't gotten to for a very good reason. The first section I want to talk about is going to be Terrible Worlds Revolutions. Now, the first one in this grouping is Ironclads. It is available on Kindle and on audio, but the physical books are not even physically available, except in the Revolutions Omnibus edition, which I will definitely put a link to in my description box down below.
I think at the most there might have been 1,000 copies, and obviously that was some considerable time ago, so it is I mean, I don't have any spare copies left of any of those, I think, and it is genuinely a bit of a pain to get hold of if that's the thing that you want.
Ironclads is Adrian Tchaikovsky's military science fiction novella. This one follows Sergeant Ted Regan and his misfit expendable team, which has been asked to go to the front to find the missing son of a wealthy, important corporate family. But why didn't his expensive battlesuit, known as an ironclad, protect him? Could the enemy have figured out how to hack it? Or is there something else going on? Either answer means something really bad for the current war and Sergeant Regan and his friends. And I really like the way that he plays around with themes and classism in this book. I thought that he came across as very neutral when it came to war, and I was really surprised with how little action there was for being a military sci-fi book. But what I found most interesting is because I am a super fan of military sci-fi, I just didn't find this book to be notable. So I would say that this book was probably written to play with people who are not quite sure that they like military science fiction. And this one is one that I would rank as a lower tier novella just because I think that the ending was a little bit forgettable and there isn't really a big twist in this one. And in a lot of the other novellas, there is. So this one definitely didn't light my fire, but is one that if you're kind of intrigued, it's still a really decent novella. The next novella is Firewalker. What a beautiful cover. This one is found on both Kindle and audiobook, but is unfortunately not in physical copy. It costs about $200 on Amazon, so you might be better off in the digital versions. This is Adrian Tchaikovsky's dying Earth climate fiction type of a book, and he also plays very significantly with the narrative in this one. We have a future Earth that is dying. It has been destroyed by global warming and climate change. And we follow Mao, who is a street urchin of one of the last cities in all of humanity. And it's home to a space elevator for the rich to escape the dying Earth. Now, Mao is a firewalker. He's one of the few who are willing to venture into the heat away from the power and the AC to fix whatever technology has been broken. He and his team, Lupe and Hotep, are called together to fix one of the solar panels that power the rich hotel AC. But in order to fix this, they're going to have to go downstream to fix all of the power banks that are further than anyone has ever ventured away from the town. And Mao isn't the hero of this story.
It's got a very nice balance of the quite hardline science fiction. You know, it is a near future climate catastrophe where the rich are abandoning the Earth, set amongst the people who are basically putting them in space at their own cost and expense. And at the same time, it's got some incredibly weird stuff because it's almost like a Heart of Darkness journey where the three kids just go into the wilderness and they just meet these successive layers of strangeness as they get further and further away from civilization.
That's one of the most intriguing aspects of this particular novella, is that Mao is considered a side character, and so he's the one that's really telling us the story of the hero from his perspective. And I thought that was such a fun and playful way to tell this story.
I often have a point of view character who is not really the protagonist. I mean, in Children of Time, even my best known work, Halston Mason, the human character who we get to see everything through, basically doesn't do anything. He's only really there to observe, and it's very much more the engineer character who is the hero of the human side of the story. Which honestly, it's an interesting lesson in a way to show that actually the things we get told that you should never do in a book are actually entirely doable if you think through the consequences. Because you're told, oh well, the hero has got to be active and they've got to have kind of leverage and agency in the story, and actually you don't need that. You can have someone like Mao who just kind of follows along, especially if the story is to do with discovery and just sort of what you are going to encounter out in the wild or out in space or whatever. That's often the most useful perspective.
I kind of expected a little bit more lecturing, I guess, on climate change. It missed some kind of X element. You could really see that while he was playing with the story, he succeeded in some ways and kind of didn't quite master it in others. But I still recommended it. I had a really good time with this novella, and I would still recommend this book if you happen to be interested in this kind of theme. The next one is going to be Ogres. This one is available on Kindle and audiobook, but again, the hardcover edition is $191, so I think you're again limited to the digital version. Don't forget that you can get all three of these in the Omnibus edition. This is a really hard one to decide what he's playing with here. It's a fantasy, but also a dystopian. In this world, it's dominated by ogres. They're bigger, they're stronger, and they're also the ruling class. They drive from village to village demanding tribute, and it is a big deal to defy one, which is exactly what Torque, the headmaster's son, does in this story. And to save his son's life, his father immediately banishes his son into the world to fend for himself. And this puts Torque on a path of discovering the science that put ogres in a class above everyone else. This one is a little bit of a dark, twisty end. This is one of my high tier Adrian Tchaikovsky novellas here because I really enjoy a twisty ending, and this is one that I didn't quite see coming. I thought it really worked for me, and I really enjoyed this one. I remember really wanting this one to win a Hugo at the time. It was a nominee, and if you get a chance, this is one that I thought was incredibly accessible and is a really good one for both fantasy and science fiction fans.
I mean, I don't know if I'm going back to second person anytime soon, because it was Ogres is a very special case, and when you get to the end, you understand that there is a very good reason why it is being told in second person. But yes, it is a weird mode to write in, certainly.
Now, that does it for Terrible Revolutions, and I have to say that of these three novellas, my very favorite of these three is Ogres. That's the one that I would recommend starting with in this particular set. Now let's move on to Terrible Worlds Destinations. Now these three novellas are considerably more dark and brooding and philosophical in some ways. So if you're aiming for more accessibility, I would probably go more towards Revolutions. If you're aiming more towards brooding and very dark, then I would aim more towards Destinations. The first one in this grouping is Walking to Aldebaran. This one is available in audio and Kindle, and the book is again not available because it's $150. I don't own this one, so I definitely did the audio version, which is read by the author himself, and he did a fantastic job. So I would recommend the audio on this one. This one is his version of a sci-fi horror novel. It's kind of a little bit trippy. It's also kind of a big dumb object kind of a trope. In this one, we have when a dark alien object appears on the edge of our solar system, a team of international scientists are sent to investigate, including our main character, Gary the astronaut. As the team gets closer, they realize this object is almost moon or planet sized, and it's covered in little tiny tunnels. So they decide that they're going to go ahead and investigate the tunnels, and disaster strikes and the team is inevitably separated, leaving Gary all alone with the creature that is hunting him. This book was so haunting, and the ending was quite a twist, and I gotta say, I loved this one. It really worked for me, but I discovered that a lot of people, my friends who love horror, really did not get along with this book, including Rachel from the Shades of Orange, who really didn't have great things to say about it. But as a reader who doesn't love horror, this one was really awesome in my opinion. So take that or leave it as you will, but I really enjoyed this cool little creepy chunk of Adrian Tchaikovsky's brain. And I would put this in the high tier of Adrian Tchaikovsky's novellas.
Oh, thank you.
This one is probably in my top 3 for sure. Now, that's my preference, and we're different people. You may not love it as much as I did, but I sure did.
Sometimes your novellas can be very difficult to get a hold of because you guys are doing these limited runs of the hardback editions or even the physical copies. Is that done kind of intentionally to create people to order them soon, or how did that come about?
So I don't think it's an intentional kind of fake scarcity thing, but physical copies are expensive. Physical copies of novellas are expensive, especially if you're doing nice editions, which the Solaris hardbacks are. So the idea was from the start we would do a limited number, which number has kind of been creeping up as the series has been going on, as physical copies, and then it will be ebook and in fact audiobook, which are hopefully readily available. And then obviously now we are doing the paperback omnibus editions, which hopefully are a little easier to get hold of because they're not limited in quantity. But the idea is the hardbacks are kind of collector edition. They're all signed, and they're all sort of whatever the inner cover sort of. There's sort of art on those pages and all that sort of thing. And there are technical terms of the thing that I should know being a writer, but I don't.
Now, the next one in this grouping is One Day All This Will Be Yours. This is available in audio Kindle, and the book is only $75, which is still a lot, not quite as much as the other ones. This one is Adrian's time travel novel. This one is very philosophical. The ending is kind of beyond me, so let me tell you a little bit about it. This one follows a man who lives at the end of time. And he has a perfectly gorgeous utopian existence. And this gets interrupted by a team of 2 intruders who get him involved in the casualty time war. The problem is that the man wants to prevent the war from ever happening, but nobody really remembers how it started because time keeps changing. So we proceed in this book from the end of the war all the way back to the beginning, and then some. It was kind of a little over my head, this loop of his story, and I'm going to have to re-listen to it or maybe get this one on Kindle because I felt like the ending kind of went over my head. It was very nihilistic, very philosophical. He really talks a lot about what matters most. I think one of the keys of understanding the story is knowing that he probably wrote it during the pandemic of 2020 because it came out the very next year. So that might have a lot to do with how philosophical this one was. Because this one was a little bit over my head, but it was very sophisticated, I'm going to rank it in the middle tier of all of the Adrian Tchaikovsky's novellas, just because for me, I didn't quite get the ending, but I sure enjoyed the ride. Then we have the final novella in this section, and that's gonna be And Put Away Childish Things. Luckily, this one is available in audio, Kindle, and physical copy if you're interested. This one is very dark. Woo! Way darker than I expected. And it is mostly fantasy, but also a little bit horror. There are some content warnings here in case you're somebody who doesn't want to deal with that. I'm gonna say that this is his Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe inspired book, maybe with a little bit of The Magicians trickled in there, but be ready for some incredible depression after this book. Holy crap.
Holy cow.
This one follows the washed-up children's TV host named Harry, who has been riding the coattails of his family's famous last name because of a beloved children's series that his grandmother wrote called The Underhill. Think Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe for that. You're kind of seeing the connection here, right? But when Harry is forced to go back into his family home for financial reasons, he ends up discovering a lot of dark truths about what happened in that house and with his family. One of them being that maybe Underhill isn't quite imaginary, and maybe that is the worst thing to happen to him.
When the bleakest stuff is the theme of the book, I do tend to bring out the comedy as well, just to make it a bit more palatable.
This was an incredibly dark story. I don't know why this one got me so hard. I can't say I enjoyed this ride, but whew, is this a sophisticated story? If you want to feel depressed, if you really want to think about adultifying your children's story, specifically Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe style stories, you should pick this one up. But don't say I didn't warn you, okay? Don't say. That does it for Terrible Worlds Destinations. Now I gotta say, these feel a lot more sophisticated and polished to me, all three of them. But of the three, the one that I would pick, that I loved the most, was definitely Walking to Aldebaran. Aldebaran? I think that's how you say it. Anyway, I definitely loved that one the most, but be warned, all of these are very dark. Now let's move on to the next one, which is Terrible Worlds Transformations. Now this is kind of a category that I know he's going to expand because there's only one book in there so far, and that's going to be Saturation Point. Now, Saturation Point came out this year, so it's still available in all three formats. So if you're interested in this one, I would recommend it. You should probably go ahead and get yourself a copy of it, either physically or however you prefer. This one was a very high-level story, top tier for me. This one is a weird, incredible combination of Roadside Picnic by the Strugatsky brothers mixed in with Jeff Vandermeer's weird biological strange worlds.
The Saturation Point turned into pretty much it's a climate sci-fi horror novel, and I'm certainly leaning into the horror aspect of things in that particular set.
I think this was an incredible combination. This book follows the voice diary of Jasmine Marks, who is an assistant researcher who is going back into the zone, an area of Earth that is so hot and poisonous that humans can't survive without a suit. And this world is so intriguing. Think very much Jeff Vandermeer, and it's very otherworldly in its appearance. And the corporation who recruited her is looking into the disappearance and crash of her former mentor, Dr. Fell. But things don't go exactly according to plan, and Jasmine hasn't really been told the whole truth. This very much read like a voice diary, with people interrupting her thoughts all the time. Some of the chapters even ended mid-sentence when there was big action happening. So this one is probably pretty awesome for audio. I did physically read this one, but I had a fantastic time. He does such a good job with homage to the Strugatsky brothers zone while adding a lot more life and interest in biology into it with the Jeff Vandermeerian world. What an incredible combination. This one really hit for me, so this would be my pick anyway.
Something I come back to a lot in my books is the eerie, the wild place that has its own motivation and it is its own antagonist in the story. And I do it in Guns of the Dawn and various other points, and especially in Cage of Souls. But Saturation Point is where I think I'm doing it as in my most sort of science fictional mode, in that the wild place is entirely it's a rational place, unlike, say, the zone in Roadside Picnic. But at the same time, it's a place that's become completely inimical to human life.
I do expect him to add more novellas, at least 2, to this section, but as of right now, they aren't out yet. Let's get on to the next section of novellas, and that's going to be the standalones and the duology. So this one has 4 novellas in this section. Let's talk about the duology first. This is the Expert Systems duology. It encompasses the Expert Systems Brother, that's book 1, and the Expert Systems Champion, that's book 2. What's important to know is that the Expert Systems Champion book 2 does not have an audio, but all the rest of of them. The Kindle, the audio, and the book are available for book 1, and the Kindle and the book are available for book 2. So book 1 takes a very weird page from Fern Gully or maybe Avatar and mixes it in with a nature plus technology in a lot of fun ways that I wasn't expecting. In this book, we follow a boy named Handry, who is the victim of a very unfortunate accident through no fault of his own. Let's call it a glitch. And he ends up getting evicted from his home tree, the only world he's ever known, and his sister, who is the only family he has left. And he has to survive in this incredibly strange, poisonous world that doesn't seem very habitable for him. He ends up stumbling upon quite a few answers as to why the world is the way it is, and his perspective broadens as his survival chances definitely start to decrease. This book had a really fun world for it, and I loved spending time in the world a lot more than I loved Handry himself. I thought the title was really clever once you get to that part of the story, and I actually really enjoyed this first book. It was kind of awesome. The next book, the final conclusion, is 10 years in the future. We go back to Handry, who has now formed a ragtag team of misfits, and they're trying to survive the world together. The villages are sort of forced to have like a begrudging respect of his existence now, even to the point where when the villages get into trouble, they call upon his ragtag group to come help solve the problem. And not only are they able to help solve the problem, but they start discovering a whole lot more about their sordid past. And boy, is it a huge chunk to bite. This story was almost too big for its britches. I think that Adrian Tchaikovsky kind of got lost in the details of this world and kind of over-explaining this idea to the point where I did not love this book. It is, to me, the worst novella that Adrian Tchaikovsky has written.
That's harsh.
That's right. I'm really sad to say that because I can see the idea of where he was trying to go. This story needed to be a novel, not a novella. And he tried to cram so much in there that you got lost in the justifications, but I really didn't enjoy it. So pick up this one at your own risk.
I am hoping to write a third one in that series, which will then give us kind of almost like a novel's worth of expert system. So in a way, that one may actually turn out to be a bit of a kind of a novel written in parts.
Next, we have the standalone Elder Race. This one won the Hugo Award for novellas a couple of years ago, and it is very well beloved. This one is available in all 3 formats, so you should be able to pick it up anywhere you want. And I would probably say that the theme of this one is the famous quote by Arthur C. Clarke: "Any sufficiently advanced technology is the same as magic." And I realize that that is not verbatim the quote, but I'm sorry, it's close enough. So in this one, we're following the 4th princess, Liness, who goes on a quest behind the Queen Mother's back to seek help and protection from the wizard in the tower from a demon that is plaguing her kingdom. The problem is that Elder Nier isn't a wizard, and he was expressly forbidden from meddling in the affairs of the local people. And that's exactly why he knows that this can't be a demon, because everyone knows that demons don't actually exist. So as you can tell, Elder Nier and Liness get mixed up in this epic plot with an alternate perspective back and forth between someone who has very solid beliefs in what she's doing and somebody who has lots of doubts back and forth. In a way, this book is almost like a play against faith and logic, or a belief and logic, without even ever mentioning religion. I really had a good time with this back and forth story. It really makes you think about different perspectives and how things aren't always what they appear. I think that's the genius of this book, and I really rank it in at least the middle, if not top tier novella ranking for this one because I had a really good time with it. It won the Hugo because it's so accessible and it appeals to both fantasy and science fiction the way that it's written. So I would definitely recommend picking this one up if you're looking for a starter novella for him. You can really see how he starts to play with things, but it doesn't quite feel as sophisticated as some of the other novellas that we've talked about, probably because it isn't quite as dark as some of the other ones.
Elder Race is very much inspired by a very old story of Gene Wolfe's called Trip Trap, specifically in the way that in that story, he again presents a world which is seen through the ideas of very much in that case, a kind of almost like a Conan-esque barbarian hero sort of character, and a sort of a high-tech sci-fi scholar who has turned up to study the world. And they run into something that both of them interpret very differently, and they're both kind of right. And I thought that was such a neat idea that it's something I definitely wanted to have a go and play with myself. And so Elder Race is kind of my take on that idea of how you, rather than privileging one narrative over another, you get a situation where the character who has technically less knowledge, Lynn, who is, she's sort of a warrior princess, and she interprets things in terms of magic and demons and so forth. And her perspective on what they do actually encounter is just as valid and just as useful as the anthropologist Naya's.
The next standalone novella on this list is called Made Things. This one is available in Kindle audio and book, so you can get a hold of a copy of it if you're interested. And in many ways, this book is for those fans out there of Brandon Sanderson's novella, Emperor's Soul. This one is not the same story, it's not even inspired by, but it feels of the same quality that novella is. So if you're interested in that, I would probably say that the theme here is Indian in the cupboard, if that makes sense. This one was probably the most finished of all of Adrian's novellas. This one felt the most polished, it felt like he worked on it the hardest, and it felt like a complete story. So if you're interested in feeling what he can do with a short story, this is the one that I would recommend for you. So Made Things is about Capelia, a orphaned woodworker who is barely scraping out a living on the streets of the most magical city in the world. She is a barely passable thief who has a secret in her pocket. Actually, two. She has two made things, tiny little dolls that have life that are helping her commit crimes on the street to make a living. In return, she is helping them build more to help increase their population. Her and her team are dragged into a shady crew hired to steal a life-size golem found in the palace with all of the magical rich mages. But things aren't quite what they appear, and as they all do with these jobs, things go sideways fast. This story again felt like the most finished, the most polished of all of Adrian Tchaikovsky's novellas. And I'm probably not doing it justice with my summary, but I can tell you that this one was a fun world to get into. It was easily lost, easily believable, and it felt like a complete story. And I really loved that. I felt like this story didn't have to keep going. It doesn't have to have a sequel or a prequel. And I know he's written a short story in this world, but man, I gotta tell you, this one felt the most complete. And that does it for our standalones and our duology. All right, now I do want to mention a couple of novellas that I didn't quite get to that you might notice on Adrian's website. And that is going to be House on an Old Cliff, which is considered a standalone novella, but I can't get a hold of it. It's literally only sold in the UK and they won't ship it to the US. I have no idea why, but they're making it really hard to get a hold of some of his novellas, so I don't know what to do about that.
The House on the Old Cliffs is a bit, it's on my site as a novella. It's a slightly special case because it's not actually a novella per se. I think lengthwise it counts as the bizarre category novelette. It's a long short story, and the reason it's in a novella size format is because it's a special dyslexia friendly print edition from both press. This is probably not going to be any easier to get hold of, unfortunately, but it was in print in an anthology put out by the Fantasy Faction website.
The next one is 3 novellas that he calls the Abaddon Collection. This one I was kind of confused about. I wasn't sure if these novellas fit within some kind of gaming world or what's going on with them.
And you also have that Abaddon series on your website. I was hoping we could talk a little bit about those because they deserve some love too.
Sure. I mean, they're quite a weird thing. So each of those is these are all commissioned as part of novella series from multiple authors. The Bloody Deluge is set in Abaddon's quite long-running Afterblight series, which it's sort of post-apocalypse. There's been a plague that's wiped out almost everyone, and it's just sort of various survivors doing what they can do. And I decided I would kind of do I would combine that with a bit of Polish history that most people probably haven't come across, which is where the title The Bloody Deluge comes from, and it's basically it's all to do with far right nationalists, actually, which have become unpleasantly more topical since I wrote the book, and it's to do with a siege and a monastery and that kind of thing. There's a series a novella Noblesse Oblige in the book Dracula Rise of the Beast, which is kind of a Dracula through the ages book, and mine is Dracula running into real life vampire Elizabeth Bathory in sort of Renaissance Hungary. And then even in the Cannon's Mouth, which I think is probably my favorite of the 3, is the book is kind of the fantasy Shakespeare reverse.
Which
so
is
it is all
intriguing.
Yeah, I mean, and like I say, I mean, this wasn't my pitch. It was just something that I was asked to contribute to, and I had enormous fun with it, and basically took a huge number of characters from the problem plays and the comedies and just threw them all together, up to and including conflating Macbeth with the Witch King of Angmar, which was a lot of fun.
So all 3 of these actually sound really cool, and they are definitely 3 that I'm willing to spend 99 cents on to order them through my Kindle. However, sadly, I didn't get to them before filming this video, but as it turns out, we all knew I wasn't going to be caught up anyway, because it turns out that there's more coming anyway.
One of the ones I like the most, and it's one I would quite like to follow up on, but I'm not sure there's quite the kind of the commercial opportunity for it, is Made Things. It's this very weird fantasy world that, like a lot of my fantasy stuff, the world is considerably bigger than the story being told in that one novella. And in fact, there is also a long short story in that same setting, which I believe Tor.com made available on their website. There's a lot of places that one could go, and there is this whole kind of, it's this traditional fantasy city, and there are wizards and there's a thieves guild and all that sort of thing, and at the same time you've got this whole emergent artificial intelligence thing going on, but in a fantasy setting rather than a science fiction setting. So there are all these different little sort of games being run in that setting, which I really would like to expand on, and which had an enormous amount of fun sort of taking what is essentially quite a science fictional idea and then clothing it in all of this fantasy sort of fantasy adventure, sort of almost like D&D adventure style trappings. Probably the most accessible one I've written is almost certainly Elder Race, because it kind of captures sci-fi and fantasy both.
Yeah.
And it's certainly one that people have reacted very, very positively to. So that's probably the best starting point for my shorter work. What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher.
I also read that one.
The Butcher of the Forest by Premi Mohammed is absolutely excellent. And there's one I read relatively recently, which is a very, very weird but very enjoyable science fiction novella by Paul Cornell, which is Rosebud, which is not terribly well known and deserves to be a lot better known than it is. I think I would really like to see a little more love for Firewalkers. It's one of my own personal favourites. I think it's got a very nice balance of the quite hardline science fiction. It is a near future climate catastrophe where the rich are abandoning the Earth, set amongst the people who are basically putting them in space at their own cost and expense. And at the same time, it's got some incredibly weird stuff, because it's almost like a Heart of Darkness journey where these three kids just go into the wilderness and they just meet these successive layers of strangeness as they get further and further away from civilization. I've had a certain amount of theatrical experience, but I'm not an actor, and therefore there are books that would have too large a cast or specific accents I can't do and things like that. I started off with Walking to Aldebaran with the narration because I very much enjoyed reading parts from it at conventions, which is the thing that happens quite a bit in the UK. And it's a first-person narrative, which means there's only really one voice. And I've slowly expanded out from that. So I've done a couple of third-person ones. And I've done a few with quite a few different characters in it. And hopefully I'm getting better at it each time. And I've also started going on. I've done a couple of full-length novels now in narration. I'm always on the lookout for something I can do, and it has genuinely impacted on my writing because you become much, much more aware of homophones, for example. Which look very distinct on the page, but are going to sound exactly the same when they get read. In one series of my books, there is a distinction between humans and humans with a small h or a capital H, which obviously looks grand. It's a very clever device when you're writing, and it's completely incomprehensible in the audiobook. So I've started pointing that when I write it because I'm aware that someone is going to have to read that.
A lot of your novellas in particular are almost getting a little bit more attention in the award arena than some of your novels, which I'm kind of surprised about, especially in things like the Hugos. Granted, they have their own problems, but but you definitely seem to always be on the list now for the short list for some best novellas, it seems like.
Yeah, they've done remarkably well. In fact, I mean, it was Elder Race that was my first Hugo nomination.
Let me know in the comment section down below which of his novellas you've liked the most. If you've read any of the ones that are upcoming, I'm always interested to know. I would highly recommend that you guys pick up one of these novellas. I've had a great time reading them and plan to continue with more. Be sure to come join us on Discord and chat about them. And until next time, you guys, I'll see you in the next video.